Okay. This is gonna be like a really long video. Hi everyone, my name is Brianna, aka Slow Reader, and today I come to you with a book review. So before I tell you what book I'm about to review, I've kind of had this like series on my mind, right? And from the book haul I did like many moons ago, I noticed that a lot of the books that my friend gave me were about a lot of other minorities or just like experiences that weren't my own. So for that sake, I decided to call this series of review For the Culture, and I'm gonna make like a little cute playlist for it and everything. So the next couple of books will probably be heavily kind of like around the same themes of like someone's story or someone else that's in a different country and like their experiences and all that good stuff. So that's kind of like the theme of the next couple of reviews coming up. Without further ado, I introduce to you The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. I keep saying her last name wrong. Allende. So this book is a popular Latin American like literature novel. It was published in 1982, and it's classified as a magical realism historical fiction book. Listen, I don't know what that means, so take that for what you will. There's people who do like a lot of research into what is magical realism and what it means and how to classify it in novels. I was under the assumption that it was magic that happens in real life, like in a real sort of real life like sort of setting, and not in a really fantasy based setting. But it might not be that, so I don't know. In this case, girl, who was talking to you? In this case, the book takes place in Latin America. The specific country in Latin America is never specified, but there are characters which can like see spirits and move things with their mind, and they're very like clairvoyant and can see into like this very spiritual world and whatnot. So that's where the magical realism in this book takes place. First and foremost, my reviews are not like spoiler free, so if you don't want to be spoiled for the plot, skip to the timestamp that shows up on the screen and go from there into like my actual review of the book. So the book claims to be about the story of a family, right? Very humble beginnings, if I must say. But it talks about the story of a family and how a man named Esteban kind of has shame for his daughter, but then his granddaughter becomes his biggest pride. And I was thinking, oh, his granddaughter is obviously going to do something very important in the book, which she kind of does, but we'll get into that later. But a lot of the books, a lot of these books that kind of disappoints me is the fact that they don't give away the story, which is a good thing, but at the same time, you read like the back and then you still don't know what it's about. So like, it doesn't really tell you what the story's about. Trying not to give too much away, but in the same breath, it doesn't really give anything away. So to provide some insight, this book is about a family, about 3 generations of that family, and the things that they go through, their trials and tribulations, their romances, all of that. But it's also very heavy on politics. It's very heavy on politics. And there's like some feminism in there that's pretty good too. But I feel like the book mostly focuses on the politics that the country is going through at the time, like the historical politics, I guess. And the war that's happening outside of their country, but slowly making its way like into the country and affecting them and changing their lives and stuff like that. So that's kind of like a sense of what the story is about. Now we're gonna get into the nitty gritty. I want to talk about plot just because I tend to like talking about plot. So here we go. So our story begins with the Deval family in Latin America. You have Nevaeh Deval, who is a rich suffragist, and Severo Deval, who is a politician. Well, up and coming politician. He's not quite an established politician yet. Nevaeh, when I say Nevaeh is a rich suffragist, it kind of, and I talked to my friend about this, but it kind of makes her stand out. She is a very passionate person who fights for what she believes in, which is obviously women's rights. But a lot of women that she's trying to fight for tend to be in the lower class from her. So in this case, the working class. A lot of these women work day to day, paycheck to paycheck, making minimum wage, just barely surviving, and tend to, it's not like they don't like Nevaeh, but they don't listen to Nevaeh just because the way she approaches them, she's very much so clad in like the latest fashion and really done up and looking all nice, while the women are not looking like that, basically. And I think to some extent it's like the YouTube videos, right, where someone is like giving, like helping the homeless social experiment thing, but like they're clad in like Gucci and Prada, and like they're doing this just kind of like to feel some sense of pride. And I feel like Nevaeh, to some extent, she means well, but her approach is wrong. Nevaeh isn't even a very important character in the book, but so Nevaeh and Severo have 7 kids, and only 2 of them are really talked about, so I don't know what is going on with the other 5. But you have Rosa and then you have Clara. Rosa is just the pretty one. She's like the prettiest girl in the whole town and whatever, and that's really all she has going for her, is that she's pretty and she like sews, but she sews like all these strange creatures and starts making up creatures and strange beasts with like the head of a lion and the body of like a giraffe and all this stuff. Like it's weird. She just loves it. So Rosa is known for being the pretty one. Clara is really I think Clara's the youngest out of all the siblings, and she's just known for being clairvoyant, basically. And it's not as if it's not like she's a witch, but she just has like spiritual powers. Like she can see ghosts and move things, and she can like see into the future and has a very strong sense of intuition and all that good stuff, right? So at this point you would assume that the story is about one of these 2 girls, but no. The book is actually about this guy named Esteban Trueba. I think I said his name correctly. I apologize if I didn't. But you have this guy named Esteban. He starts off as a miner. Well, that's kind of half of a lie. He starts off in a mine, but he's thinking back to when he first met Rosa. And Rosa has so many admirers and so many fans that really it was almost kind of intimidating. But he courts her and he becomes, her fiance. In this sense, Esteban is really the only one who has approached Rosa with a marriage proposal, just because everybody else was too intimidated or didn't have the guts to like fight other men off, which, okay, that's neither here nor there. Rosa basically agrees to marry Esteban. It's never quite clear why. She just did it just because he was the first guy that asked. So she just agreed to marry him, and Esteban was like, cool, and like fucks off to the mountains where he can like dig for gold so he can become rich and wealthy and like feel worthy of marrying her, basically, which he really didn't have to do. Like Rosa never really cared that much. But, oh no, it's not Rosa, it's Rose. Excuse me. Why was I saying her name wrong? Despite this, Rose kind of like, I think Esteban was gone for like 2 years. So Rose just like forgets that Esteban ever existed. Well, not that. She knows she's engaged, but she just forgets what he looks like, forgets basically his name, and like continues living her life the way she wants to live it. She's a very oblivious sort of girl, always has her head in the clouds. She's like never quite there. She's just like whatever. So take that for what you will. Clara, being the psychic, predicts that Rose dies, and surprisingly, she actually dies. Albeit it was an accident due to poison that was meant for the father, Severo. The whole poison thing was supposed to be like a threat from his like political enemies to intimidate him, but instead Rose gets sick, and they were like, give her some tea that was mixed with the alcohol that was poisoned, and she dies. Failed political assassination, Rose dies, and Severo kind of gives up on his political dreams and aspirations and instead becomes a lawyer. Just kind of because he's like, oh, I want to keep the rest of my family safe. Esteban's been mining for 2 years. He found out about Rose's death, and I mean, Esteban is kind of like this lone wolf guy who's also strangely a fuckboy. So like, he gets with easy women, but he's like not interested in romance, and like he believes that love is a myth until he sees like Rose, and then he wants to like make her his. Clara sees her sister get an autopsy because a doctor comes in and is trying to figure out the cause of her death. So him and his assistant take her out to this, they have like this separate house, but it's not really like a house. It's like it's kind of like a garage, but bigger. So the doctor is doing this autopsy on Rose's body, and during which Clara looks through the window to watch them. And obviously she's disturbed by the fact that like they're cutting her sister open and like digging around in her body. But not only that, everyone is so emotional about the fact that Rose is dead, that the doctor kind of leaves the room and leaves it up to his assistant to like fix her up. The assistant basically sews her back up, and he starts like kissing her lips, both of them, and just my God. So after that he recloses her, and then he comes outside and finds Clara, and Clara, he takes Clara back into the room. This disturbed Clara so much that she stayed silent for, I think, was it like 11 years? I think it was 11 years. And her family was under the assumption that maybe something was wrong with her, that it was a mental illness or something like that, but she just didn't want to talk. So she didn't say anything for like 11 years. So Esteban finds out about Rose's death and goes to her funeral, and is kind of triggered the whole time. Esteban, of course, after the funeral, decides to return back home. His mother is very sick and is bedridden, and his sister was the main one that was taking care of her while Esteban was away at the mines. His sister Ferula kind of she has this grudge against Esteban for leaving her here, and the fact that she was forced to take care of her mother for like her entire life. And she kind of has this, I don't know what the word I'm trying to think of is, and of course I'll figure it out later, but she has this like, I guess, regret in her heart in a sense. So when he comes back home, turns out that his father gambled away all the money that the family had, and his mother is sick and bedridden, and Ferula is burdened with taking care of her mother, and the bitch is kind of bitter about it. So Esteban stays with them for about a week before fucking off to his mother's original estate, which is called Tres Marias. The whole place is trash. The servants are living like bums. The building's falling apart. It looks bad. It's not in a great state. Esteban whips his servants, or rather his slaves, into shape, quite literally. "They're degenerate ideas," he muttered. "Bolshevik ideas designed to turn the tenants against me. What they don't realize is that these poor people are completely ignorant and uneducated. They're like children. They can't handle responsibility. How could they know what's best for them? Without me, they'd be lost. If you don't believe me, just look what happens every time I turn my back. Everything going to pieces and they start acting like a bunch of donkeys. They're very ignorant. My people have it fine now. What more do they need? They have everything they want. If they complain, it's out of sheer ingratitude. They have brick houses. I blow their kids' noses and cure their parasites. Give them vaccinations and teach them how to read. Is there any other hacienda for miles that has its own school? No. Whenever I can, I bring a priest in to say mass for them, so I don't see why the priest comes to talk to me about injustice. He has no business butting in on matters he doesn't know anything about, and they're outside of his duties. I'd like to see him try to run this property. I wonder if he'd be so high-minded then. You have to use a strong hand on these poor devils. That's the only language they understand. The minute you get soft, they lose their respect. I'm not denying that I've often been severe, but I've always been fair. I've had to teach them everything, even how to eat, because if it were up to them, all they eat is bread. If I don't keep an eye on them, they start giving their milk and eggs to the pigs. They don't know how to clean their asses, and they want the right to vote. How are they supposed to know about politics when they don't even know where they live? They're capable of voting for the communists, just like the miners in the north, who might push the whole country over in the brink with their strikes. And now, of all times, when the price of copper is at its peak, what I would do up there is send the troops and let the bullets fly to teach them once and for all. Unfortunately, the only thing that really works in these countries is the sick. This isn't Europe. What you need here is a strong government with a strong man. It would be lovely if we were all created equal, but the fact is we're not. It couldn't be more obvious. The only one who knows how to work around here is me, and I defy you to prove otherwise. So eventually Esteban gets a letter from his sister to say that telling him that his mother is dying. So he goes to see his family after like 20 years. His mom tells him that her last dying wish is for him to have like a child to carry on their like family lineage, and then she ends up dying. Esteban realizes that he doesn't necessarily have like relationships with anybody except for the Duval family. So he goes back to the Duval family to ask them if there are any other women eligible for him to marry. The only daughter that they have left to marry off is Clara, who becomes, apparently she's more beautiful over the years, and he's just like intrigued by her beauty. I'm over it. She's not as pretty as Rose, of course, but beautiful nonetheless. Clara speaks for the first time in 11 years, and the two cut to the chase because Clara does not fuck around. Esteban courts her a bit before proposing. They get married. Everything's happy, yada, yada, yada. At this point, Esteban uses his wealth to build this house, which is referred to the big house on the corner, and throughout the rest of the book, the house is referred to as the big house on the corner. So he builds this extravagant, lovely house, mostly for Clara. They move in. Claudia's kind of like, whatever. She's not that impressed by his wealth, but she's also not she's not like a materialistic woman. Esteban's sister Ferrula moves in with Clara into the big house on the corner, mostly so she can basically serve Clara as like this sort of maid. And during the time, they become very close friends. Clara gets pregnant, and of course Esteban wants it to be a boy, but it turns out to be a girl, and Clara names the baby Blanca. During her pregnancy, Ferrula confesses her sins to the father. That sacrifice is recorded in heaven, my child. Even if I sinned in my thoughts, well, it depends on your thoughts. I can't sleep at night. I feel as if I'm choking. I get up and walk around the garden, and then I walk inside the house. I go to my sister-in-law's room and put my ear to her door. Sometimes I tiptoe in and watch her while she sleeps. She looks like an angel. I want to climb into bed with her and feel the warmth of her skin and her gentle breathing. Pray, my child. Prayer helps. For God's sake, it's impossible to live among such uncouth people. If the rest of you want to stay in this uncivilized purgatory, that's your prerogative. But I'm returning to the city. I want to live like a human being the way I always have, Furula exclaimed when she was able to speak of the incident without bursting into tears. But she did not leave. She did not want to be separated from Clara. She had come to adore the very air Clara exhaled, and even when she no longer had the occasion to give her baths and sleep in the same bed with her, she found 1,000 ways to express her tender feelings, and to this she dedicated her existence. That woman who was so hard on herself and others could be sweet and smiling with Clara and at times, by extension, with Blanca. Only with Clara did she allow herself the luxury of giving in to her overwhelming desire to serve and be loved. With her, however slyly, she was able to express the secret, most delicate yearnings of her soul. During which Furula likes to take care of Clara and dote on her during her pregnancy, often to the point of spoiling her. Clara, for whatever reason, has a C-section and delivers a healthy baby girl. Furula turns her obsession from Clara to Blanca, the baby girl. So Clara, Furula, and Blanca go visit Tres Marias like every other summer. The very first summer where they go to visit, Blanca takes a liking to one of the other children there, Pedro Tercero Garcia. And the two end up spending the entire day together. During this time, Pedro Tercero Garcia, if it matters, is like the grandson of the like right-hand man of Esteban, who is the patron. I forgot what his title is. They said it before, but I always forget. But like when Esteban isn't around, he's basically the one in charge. Clara and Blanca stay the entire summer, basically up until autumn, until Clara gets pregnant again and they go back to the big house on the corner. At this time, Clara is pregnant, so that's what made them go back. Clara tells Esteban that she is pregnant with twins. Esteban wants to name one of them after himself. However, Clara tells him that the twins will be named Jamie and Nicholas, to which Esteban throws this like tantrum, but like no one really cares. Esteban throws this tantrum, right? And he's like breaking furniture and stuff, but like Clara doesn't give a fuck. So like as a way to spite her, Esteban starts going to these whorehouses. And throughout the book, it's very obvious that Esteban has affairs often despite his marriage. Even way before his marriage, he was out here just raping people. But after his marriage, he continues to do these things. Mostly when he's angry at Clara, he wants to like spite her. Clara doesn't really seem to care about this for one reason or another. But I think it's also the fact of like they got married without love, really. So neither of them, like they love each other, but they don't. It's weird. Clara's parents ended up dying of this terrible accident. Because of this accident, Nana, who was basically the maid for the Duval family, no longer has anyone to serve except for Clara, so she goes to serve Clara. So basically she went from the Duval family to the Trueba family, and now she serves them. Nana and Furula despised each other. They squabbled over the children's affection and fought for the right to care for Clara in her rantings and ravings. Their silent, continuous war was conducted in the kitchens, the courtyards, the hallways, but never near Clara, because the two of them had agreed to spare her that particular anguish. Nana and Furula become rivals, although they keep their rivalry a secret from Clara, so take that for what you will. Furula begins to develop a rivalry with Esteban as well, doing things in her power to keep Clara and Esteban separated. Due to this, Esteban and Furula get into this rivalry where one is trying to keep the other away from Clara. Furula had come to love Clara with a jealous passion that resembled that of a demanding husband more than it did that of a sister-in-law. With time, she lost her prudence and began to let her adoration show in many ways that did not go unobserved by Esteban. Whenever he returned from the country, Furula would manage to persuade him that Clara was in what she called one of her bad spells, so that he could not sleep in the same bed with her, and would enter her room rarely, and then only briefly. She would buttress her argument with recommendations from Dr. Cuevas, which later, when he was asked point blank, turned out to have been made up. She found 1,000 ways to come between the husband and wife, and if all else failed, she would encourage the children to beg their father to take them on an outing, their mother to read them a book, or both parents to watch over them because they had a fever or to play with them. One night, a light earthquake happens, and Furula has a fear of earthquakes. Because Furula is afraid, she goes to Clara's room and climbs into bed with her. Esteban just happened to be home, went to go check up on Clara, and sees Furula there. He gets furious and basically kicks Furula out of the house, and he forbids her from coming back to the house or anywhere around his family ever again. A couple years pass, and there's this sickness that overcomes the town. A famine spreads, and poverty strikes deeper than it ever has before. During this time, Clara is helping the unfortunate and giving away her charity, but she also mentions that the people of the town need justice. Her and Esteban have a lot of arguments about this because Esteban feels that poor people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Justice. Is it just for everyone to have the same amount? The lazy the same as those who work? The foolish the same as the intelligent? Even animals don't live like that. It's not a matter of rich and poor. It's a matter of strong and weak. I agree that we should all have the same opportunities, but those people don't even try. It's very easy to stretch out your hand and beg for alms. But I believe in effort and reward. Thanks to that, I've been able to achieve what I've achieved. I've never asked anybody for a favor, and I've never been dishonest, which goes to prove that anyone can do it. I was destined to be a poor, unhappy notary's assistant. That's why I won't have these Bolshevik ideas brought into my house. Go do your charitable work in the slums for all I care. It's all well and good. Good for building the character of young ladies. But don't start coming in here with the same half-cocked ideas as Pedro Tercero Garcia, because I won't stand for it. Pedro Tercero Garcia starts handing out these revolutionary flyers to other servants at Tres Marias. This makes Esteban really mad because he's spreading ideas such as like fair wages and, workers' unions, and that's just ridiculous. That's out of the question. That can't happen in real life. So because of this, Esteban punishes Pedro Tercero and lets him know that he doesn't like him. Esteban basically wants the servants to remain ignorant and submissive for the rest of their lives for obvious reasons. Pedro Tercero continues to get extremely close to Blanca and obsesses over this story of hens that overtake a fox that has been harassing them. Meanwhile, Furula eventually dies poor and alone. She's living in this kind of like, she's basically living in like the poor part of the poor neighborhood of the town, in this like house that doesn't have proper running water or electricity. And apparently Esteban was sending her like money so she could continue living her life somewhat comfortably, but she wasn't actually using it, and they find it in like this box that's stashed away. Pedro Tercero starts getting up early in the morning to meet with other fellow unionists at the local pub, and he starts to read the books that they're giving them, and he continues to spread the idea of forming a union with the other servants. Clara continues to visit Tres Marias every summer, and although her fondness for Pedro Tercero can't be expressed publicly anymore, they start meeting in secret at night. Natural disasters start happening in the city, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and earthquakes, and people are dirt poor and start living in tents because they're too afraid to actually start like living in their houses, so they move out into these tents. Nana ends up dying during an earthquake out of fear. She's buried in a hurry, and none of the family really goes to her funeral. During the earthquake that Nana also died in, the house was collapsing. So Esteban got injured during this time and broke literally every bone in his body. During which Clara is taking care of Esteban, but she's also taken kind of like charge as patron for a bit in terms of like doing the daily responsibilities of like watching the servants and telling them what to do, but this makes Clara kind of resent Esteban even more as time passes. Gets sick and is sent home from her school at the convent because the nuns like don't want to deal with her for whatever reason. So she goes back home to Tres Marias. Without Nana to guide the other servants at the big house on the corner, it deteriorates and Clara eventually closes it and dismisses all the servants. Once back at Tres Marias, Blanca learns that Blanca actually finds out that Esteban fired Pedro Tercero for spreading communist ideas. Despite being fired and told to never return, Blanca waits for Pedro Tercero almost every night in their usual hiding spot. Eventually, when he does come to see her in secret, Blanca confesses to him that she faked her sickness just so she would be able to see him again. Some new rich guy moves into town, and he's the new sought after bachelor. All the ladies want to be with him. All the guys want to be friends with him. He's the popular guy or whatever. His name is Count Jean de Satigny. I think that's how you say it, Satigny. And he's a man that ensures that he is rich. He is definitely rich. But no one knows what he actually does. No one knows his family lineage or even his age. So I don't know what's going on there. Count Jean asks for Blanca's hand in marriage. Blanca refuses for obvious reasons. The twins eventually come home from their schooling and they go to Tres Marias. Jamie and Tercero become friends. Eventually, Jean de Satigny and Blanca become friends, although Blanca makes it very clear that Jean is very obviously friend zoned. Jean also spies on Blanca whenever she sneaks out to see Tercero, but he's too afraid to follow her the entire way down to the river. So he always stops halfway and kind of turns back. So he knows that Blanca is sneaking out to see someone, but he doesn't know who it is. Eventually, one day he follows her the entire way and sees her sleeping next to Tercero, and he sees based on how they're sleeping the closeness of their relationship, aka true love, and he goes back to Esteban and snitches and then flees from Tres Marias. Esteban, in a fury, leaves to go get Blanca. However, he meets her halfway of him going over there. So he beats Blanca to tell him who she was with. However, he stops, realizing that Blanca was never going to tell him, even though he already knows who it is. Esteban then takes her to Clara, and Clara wakes up and is like, what's going on? Esteban rants to Clara, even though Clara kind of roasts him by saying he did the exact same thing. So he's a hypocrite. And Esteban actually hits her. Clara never speaks after he basically slaps her. Clara never talks to Esteban again. She takes off her ring and she packs up all her stuff, and her and Blanca go back to the big house on the corner. Pedro Segundo Garcia, who is the right-hand man, also leaves Tres Marias, not wanting to see what happens to his son once Esteban catches him. Esteban falls into this deep depression because Clara and Blanca are gone. His illegitimate grandson, Esteban Garcia, eventually snitches on where Tercero is. They go to his hideout and Esteban finds him. He ends up chopping off 3 of Esteban's fingers. I don't know which ones they are. I think it's these 3, or it might be these 3. Either way, he chopped them off, and eventually Tercero escapes. Esteban returns home and doesn't give him the reward money that he promised if anyone was to tell him where Tercero was. Esteban Garcia snitched for no reason without a reward. Clara and Blanca reopen the big house on the corner, and surprise, surprise, Blanca's pregnant. And Esteban is furious, so he forces a shotgun wedding between Blanca and Jean. And even though it's obvious that Jean is not the father, he marries her anyway, and is basically they pretend Jean is the father and all this and that. He's married. Esteban forces this marriage to protect his daughter's reputation, quote unquote. Oh, he also lies to Blanca and tells him that he killed Tercero. Esteban eventually decides to run as a politician for the Conservative Party, which will be all the political aspects of this book I need to explain later. But Tesoro falls into this deep depression because he can't see Blanca and he can't compose songs about like hens and foxes and rebellion and all this. He goes to see the father for refuge, and the father basically takes him out of his depression and like encourages him to learn how to play the guitar, even if he's missing some of his fingers, which somehow he does successfully. Tesoro continues to compose songs about hens and foxes, which tend to be a metaphor for rebellion. They get so famous that they're played on the radio, and his voice becomes very familiar. However, Esteban doesn't listen to the radio and bans it from his house because apparently he thinks the radio is for idiots, even though he used to listen to the radio for the news before, but now the radio is for idiots. Girl, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. Nicholas has this like little girlfriend named Amanda, and she has a brother named Miguel, and his brother becomes like more important. Her brother becomes more important later on, but he has this girlfriend, and eventually he notices that she stopped coming around. After a few weeks, he goes to visit her, and she tells him that she's pregnant. To his shock, he asks what to do because Amanda is a very non-committal person. She's not really interested in like moving in with someone or like marriage and stuff like that, and she's all about this like free love thing. Amanda decides she's going to have an abortion and that she or Nicholas are going to have to break up. Amanda doesn't love Nicholas enough to like have the baby and marry him. So even though marrying him would take her out of like poverty, because she is dirt poor, but she doesn't love him enough to like marry him. So Nicholas is hurt to be rejected since he's a fuckboy and he's like never been rejected ever in his life. He's used to like rejecting other girls, but he's not used to being rejected. So that he has like issues with that going on. But he also realizes that like, hey, poor people exist, because he's never been like around them. He's always like, he's like the rich kid that lives in like the gated community and like never really experiences the outside world. So he lives in his own little like bubble. And since he had to visit Amanda, he like realized like, wow, poor people exist out here in these streets. Nicholas asked Jamie to perform the abortion because Jamie was studying to become like a doctor. He's like a doctor in training back then. But Jamie's kind of nervous about it because he's sitting here like, I'm still a student. I'm not an actual doctor yet. But because he's also in love with Amanda, but no one knows that like Jamie is in love with Amanda, he decides to like do it. So somehow Jamie does the abortion successfully. Everything turns out okay. However, Amanda was like in pain for a bit, so like they convinced Clara to like let her move into the big house on the corner and stay with them for a while until she fully recovered. And Clara just did it without any questions. She was just like, at this point, I don't even want to know what's going on. She can just stay. Jamie worries constantly about Amanda. He stays at her side while Nicholas asks for her, but he doesn't actually go to like see her. I'll admit, chapter 8 I really didn't fully understand, but I'm going to try to explain it to you in a way that makes sense to me. If you don't, I would probably recommend reading chapter 8 yourself and or looking at Spark Notes. Because for some of the chapters I had to look at Spark Notes just to like be sitting here like, what actually happened. So Blanca is married to Jean de Satigny. They move out to this like house mansion in the desert, and like a lot of the servants that they have are like Indians, but they don't like, for whatever reason, they don't respect Blanca, and like sometimes she feels like they're making fun of her. But because she doesn't understand the language, she's never really sure. And then on top of that, if she like talks to them or gives them an order, they act like they can't hear her, or like they ignore her. So like they're like really disrespectful to her. Jean is like, tells her that he's not interested in like doing husband things because he's not interested in like the domestic married life, which honestly works out for Blanca because she's sitting here like, I don't love this man that I was forced to marry. Interesting that all of the characters that are not interested in the married life have like some issues going on with them, but we'll get into that later. In this new house, Jean likes photography, so he has this photography room built in like the back of the house. He begs Blanca to like never go in there, and he locks it and like keeps the key around his neck. So meanwhile, Jean is like receiving like money from Esteban, but he's like spending away all of his money on gambling and losing, but somehow he's still like buying very extravagant things, but no one's sure where his income is coming from, much like before. And he basically like doesn't work. He just spends all his days snorting cocaine and smoking weed. Literally written in the book, he is snorting cocaine and smoking weed. Okay. And he like doesn't really pay back his like debts that he owes to people, but he's somehow like still like running around buying fur coats and like sports cars and just like very expensive things. Jean also starts another income source where he digs up ancient Incan items out of like burial grounds and selling them to the government illegally. Eventually, Blanca is like getting suspicious about what's going on in her house, so she investigates Jean's photography room and breaks in. And the way it's decorated is like, it's like the stereotype of like Arabian Nights. But he has these portraits, and the portraits is like of him having sex with like all of the female like servants. And basically this photography room is just for his like little fetish where he like has sex with women and like records it. Like he's like one of those weird guys that's like, let's make like you know, like the weird guys that are like, let's make like a tape. They want to make a sex tape. They want to record. They want to like get like capture evidence of like what's oh girl, he's like one of those guys. Blanca, who is actually pregnant at this point, falls into labor, but she decides that she's going to get the heck out of that house and go back to the big house on the corner. So she has to get on this train ride, and the train ride is like 2 days. So she's in labor for like 2 straight days, and she's holding this baby in for 2 whole days. And I don't know how she made it, if I'm being honest. Basically, Blanca returns back home to the big house on the corner, and like as soon as she gets to Clara, she collapses onto like the kitchen table, and like she delivers her baby right then and there. And like, you know, the her brothers came in, and like the servants all helped in to like deliver the baby. She names the baby Alba. Esteban gets very attached to his granddaughter, but has a bad relationship with basically every other member of the family. This is the part of the story where on the back they were talking about like how his granddaughter was like his greatest source of like pride. That's the granddaughter, Alba. Now that Blanca is back at, I forgot which house she's at this point, if I'm being completely honest, but now that Blanca's back with her family, she starts meeting up with Tesoro again in secret. I think she's still on the big house at the corner, but they meet somewhere else, like in a public park or something, and they start meeting up in secret too. Tesoro begs Blanca to like run away with him so they can start living together, but Blanca keeps refusing, saying that, you know, she wouldn't be able to get his friends to like her, and her family would shun her, and she wouldn't be able to like adjust to like the working life. But basically just coming up with all of these sorry ass excuses of like why she couldn't basically be with Tesoro. Esteban Garcia comes to visit Esteban, and he's told to wait for him in the library. During this time, he meets Alba Trueba, who is indeed a child at this point. And he talks to her for a while, but he has a weird moment. Trigger alert, trigger warning for like, am I even allowed to say this word on YouTube? Because I don't think I am. But trigger alert for like pedophilia. He gets aroused by Alba. Like he picks her up and sits her on his lap. And for whatever reason he gets aroused by Alba, who is indeed still a child. I don't even know if I can repeat what happens. Let's just say he attempted to touch her. She got freaked out and like jumped out of his lap, and Esteban came in. However, she ran out the room, and Esteban comes in like at the moment where like Alba's running towards him, and he tries to hug her, but instead she runs out of the room. And for whatever reason, he just like doesn't think any of this, and he's like, "Oh, what do you want?" So Esteban Garcia tells him that he wants to be a police officer. And in order to get into like police academy, he needs a recommendation, and he's also asking him for this like government subsidy, which is basically like he's asking for money for like a scholarship for him to like go to the academy. Esteban agrees to it because one, he never like paid Tesoro back for snitching, or no, he never paid Esteban Garcia back for snitching on Tesoro. And two, he was like, you never know when I might need someone on the inside to like help me out and da-da-da-da-da, all that stuff. Clara dies on Alba's, 7th birthday? Once buried, the big house on the corner basically falls into ruin, and no one really bothers to try to like clean it up after that. Like everyone just stops trying. Mother Nature basically starts reclaiming that land, and it just looks awful. But everyone continues living there anyway, even though it's just completely filthy. At this point, Esteban's relationship with the rest of his family is pretty much ruined, to the point where he's on non-speaking terms with everyone but Alba. Esteban sends Alba away to a British school for young girls. There, the headmistress finds her hard to control, and she has like appalling manners. So he suggests to like she suggests to Blanca that Alba should be sent away to a Spanish school, but Esteban insists on keeping Alba in the British school because he wants her to learn English and also get into STEM. Well, science and technology, basically. Esteban insists on keeping Alba at the Spanish school because he wants her to learn English and also get into like science and technology. Blanca's still giving Tesoro like piss poor excuses for why she like won't share life with him. Mostly because she's being like non-committal, and she's afraid of living with him. And she's afraid of living with him because like she can't handle like basically living like a poor person. Even though her father basically like pretty much cut her off financially and like won't give her any money. So she's living in poverty anyway. So it's pretty much just her sense of pride in the way. Alba falls in love with Miguel, Amanda's younger brother at the university that she's attending. And Miguel is basically just like Tesoro. He's this socialist that's calling for rallies and revolution and all this and that. He's basically like this revolution leader in the story. Alba is similar to Blanca, where she doesn't really have much of an interest in her love interests like political ideologies, but she's just like doing things for the sake of like, I'm in love with him, so I'm gonna do it. She's more interested in the boy than the actual like politics that he's into. But Miguel and Alba are pretty much just Blanca and Tesoro part 2. So Alba didn't tell anyone at the university that she was Esteban Trueba's daughter. Instead, she gave her other last name de Satigny. So everybody knows her as Alba de Satigny. During this, she tries to do this protest with Miguel, where like they shut themselves into the school. The police show up and they're at this like standstill for like a couple of days. Alba eventually starts her cycle and the students have to like surrender. Alba's given to the police, and the police officer that ironically she's handed to is Esteban Garcia. And he like makes this like side comment, this small comment that's basically like outs her as Senator Trueba's granddaughter. And Miguel gets kind of upset with her, and he like pushes her off to like the police officer, and then he like leaves without looking back. However, he like forgives her for this later. But this incident makes Alba remember another accident that happened on her 14th birthday where Esteban Garcia had visited again. I don't remember why he was visiting. He visited her again, and he was like, just as he was leaving from talking with Esteban, he catches Alba in the garden, and like he starts talking to her. And eventually, long story short, he ends up like forcing his first, like, he ends up taking her first kiss, but the way he does it is like he's forcing his tongue down her neck. And like she's like disgusted by the fact that he, like, this man is like forcing his tongue in her mouth, and then he like low-key starts choking her, to which she like pushes him away, and like she runs away. But like she's yeah, Alba started having like nightmares about this, but eventually like she pushed it to the back of her mind and forgot about it. And then seeing his face again like made her remember this. Alba and Miguel make the basement of the big house on the corner like their new like secret hideout where they like do lovers things. From here, there's a big buildup about a political like election happening. The right, the conservatives, which Esteban is a part of, are confident that they will win because they usually always win. But turns out they lost and the socialists win. I'm going to go into more detail about the big hubbub that happened with the like political side of like the plot later. But just stay with me while you can, because this gets confusing a little bit. Tercero becomes the new president. And this puts a strain on his and Blanca's like relationship, because both of them become really busy, mostly Tercero. So like every time they do get a chance to like meet up, they usually just kind of like end up chilling because they're just so exhausted. Tercero asks Blanca to marry him, which he's done before, so Blanca kind of like doesn't really take it that seriously, but she's also still like avoiding him and like giving him excuses where she's just like, I'll think about it, not now, and whatever. But he tells her like, if you don't decide now, then we will never see each other again, because at this point Tercero is a little bit sick of her shit, and he's just like, he doesn't want to keep going in circles with her, even the fact that he's like ridiculously in love with her. Blanca gets upset with him and she like storms off, and she leaves thinking that, oh, he's just gonna call me back the next day like he usually does. He doesn't call her for like 3 days, so she gets worried and tries to go see him, but every time she goes to try to see him, someone always comes and is like, oh, he's busy, he's like not home right now, he's just like, he can't see you at the moment, like sort of thing. So at this point she realizes like, oh, I kind of fucked up. But this continues of them like not seeing each other for like 2 years. So at this point the conservatives are big mad that they lost the election, so they're trying to find a way to sabotage the socialists. The first attempt that they make is economic destabilization, which basically means that the people of the town now are getting paid enough to actually afford things that they need and not be like dirt poor. So they go to the store to start buying the things that they need. However, all stores or all the like resources are pretty much gone. And there's like not enough of anything to go around. So at this point people are like kind of nervous because they have money, but they can't spend it because there's not enough supplies to go around. So people just start growing their own food due to like Tercero's advice, and the Conservative Party basically realizes that their economic destabilization plan didn't work. So they move on to like their next plan. During this, we'll come back to their second plan, but during this stage, Esteban starts ordering weapons of mass destruction and hiding them in the house, which Alba and Jamie slowly start hiding away in this secret location. So the reason why Esteban is buying these like weapons is because for stage 2 of the Conservative Party is to basically perform a coup d'etat and take back the government by force. So doing this, they told like the military like, hey, you guys are going to be the brute force and we'll supply money to you. Like, we'll supply money and we'll buy weapons and supplies for you guys to do this. The agreement was that once they did do this, they would hand the government back over to the Conservative Party so that they had the power. You can already see where this is going, right? So, back at Tres Marias, the servants took over the land. Esteban has been gone for, I think, about 4 or 5 years now. So they were like, okay, he's not coming back. So, like, this is ours now. Take it over. They had this agrarian land reform thing where they have to, like, pay certain taxes if they were going to, like, farm the land and, like, sell it. They basically pretty much ended up in debt because they couldn't produce as much as the taxes were demanding. So they ended up in debt and basically had to sell the land to the government. Esteban got big mad, and in a raging fit, he took a machine gun and went over to Tres Marias. However, he didn't hurt anyone. He didn't get to hurt anyone because the servants actually ended up knocking him out, took his machine gun, and held him hostage for like a few days at Tres Marias. I don't know why they did it, but they basically said like, oh, we want like somebody to like, how do I put this? We wanted to like hold you hostage so like the to like get on TV. And I don't know why they wanted this, but they wanted it. So eventually, you know, the news comes, covers the story, and Blanca finds out. Blanca takes Alba and goes to Tercero to ask him to save Esteban. And at this point, Alba learns that Tercero is like her real father. Tercero agrees to help Esteban even though he's technically like his enemy. So they save Esteban and like everyone goes back home. At this point, we are at like chapter 13. And for chapter 13, I legitimately had to look at Spark Notes just because I didn't understand what was going on, and like the last 100 pages were like very vague in a sense. Or no, I won't say vague, but it felt rushed. Where like I didn't get a good sense of what was going on, and by the time I did, I don't think it impacted me as a reader as much as Allende wanted me to. So take that with a grain of salt. At chapter 13, this is basically where the coup d'etat happens. The president, who is not Tercero anymore, and this is not explained, but they have a whole new president, and this president is assassinated. It's not Tercero, it's some other guy. Before this happened, the president called all his like close friends to the, I don't know what the building is called. It's like the president's office. It's like the equivalent of the White House, but it's not the White House. So I don't know what it's called, but I'll probably figure it out later. But he calls all his friends, and Jamie is one of them, over there. But obviously the president gets assassinated. Jamie is captured and basically told to like renounce his political views in order to like have his life spared. But he refuses, and he's later killed as well. And the way he dies is really brutal. So Blanca starts hiding Tercero in the house because he's on the list of like wanted. And at this point, the military has become a dictatorship. The reason for this is because, like I said earlier, the military was supposed to perform the coup d'etat and return the government to the Conservative Party so they were in power. Didn't do that, so now they're under a dictatorship. Turns out, you find out later that Esteban Garcia is like the dictator, but don't worry about it yet. So Blanca hides Tercero in the house for a while just because he's on like this wanted list. Tercero becomes antsy because his love for like freedom is a lot greater than his love for Blanca. And Tercero's like, at this point, I'm just a coward and I want to leave and turn myself in. And Blanca tries to like talk him down from this, or even drugging him so he'll sleep longer so he won't escape and like turn himself in. But eventually she realizes that she can't keep him forever because Tercero wants his freedom. So Blanca begs Esteban to help them escape the country. Esteban agrees to this, and Blanca and Tercero flee to Canada, I believe it was. So eventually the police bombard into Esteban's house because Alba has been basically following in Clara's shoes of helping the poor and helping those less fortunate and giving food away to them, and even helping certain political leaders like kind of escape, but like also like move them around to like basically smuggle them. They ransack the place even though they don't find anything and beat the shit out of Alba, and take her to Esteban Garcia. Alba also gets molested in the car ride over to see Esteban Garcia, and fair enough trigger warning, and I'm sorry I didn't give it earlier. Fair enough trigger warning, here on out in the last stretch of the like last chapter, there's a lot of mention of rape, sexual assault, and physical abuse. So take that also with a grain of salt. Alba is basically taken into this like, it's basically a concentration camp, where she's tortured and raped for many months before being returned to normal society. This was Esteban Garcia's like revenge for basically being an illegitimate child for so long. And he has this weird relationship. He has this weird dynamic of having romantic feelings for Alba, but then on the other hand, he hates her and he wants to like destroy her or like kill her. And it's very strange. But at the same time, he is telling her under this guise of like torturing her that he wants to know where Tercero is. And Tercero never told like Alba where they were going. So she doesn't know that they went to Canada. She just knows that they left. So even if she were to tell him, which she didn't, she wouldn't have known anyway. But none of that really mattered because Esteban Garcia was really just using that as an excuse to torture her. Esteban begs an old friend to help him find her, which is how Alba makes it back. The book doesn't actually go into detail of how Alba is rescued. It's mostly just Esteban going to his friend, please help me. And she's like, yeah, I did the thing you asked me to do. And then she's magically back at home again. And it goes to the epilogue of like them wrapping things up. So once home, Alba writes down the family story, which is basically off of her memory, Claudia's notebooks, that she's basically written down the family's history from like beginning to end, and her notebooks. To this, her and Esteban sit down and put everything in chronological order with the help of Esteban, which is why certain pages suddenly go from third person to like Esteban's first person point of view. And I guess that's like a cute enough like reason why that happens. I'm not a big fan of like switching perspectives, but that's why it happens.